I'd say go ahead.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining me. It's 3:30. It's Tuesday on the back end of an incredible day full of incredible speakers and incredible information. I had a great time. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison McCulloch. I work for Wisconsin DNR. I'm the Lakes and Rivers team leader, and I want to personally thank you for participating in Wisconsin Water Week and for joining us in this session, Lightning Talks. We are in for an exciting series of short format talks on a very wide variety of topics. I think this has got to be one of the most information packed hours of this event. So I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from our 9 incredible speakers. We will be moving pretty quickly through each talk. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to share their work. And to help keep us on time, you'll see me pop up occasionally a short timer at a few points during their talk. If anyone runs out of time, I'll politely interrupt to move us onward. The point is to get through as much information here as we can in a short period of time. If a talk ends early, we'll move directly on to the next speaker to get this kind of rapid fire energy going. It's a lot of fun. I'm excited to have you here with us. However, because we're going to be moving relatively rapidly through the content, we will not be taking any questions during the lightning talks. Instead, viewers, I can encourage you to reach out directly to our presenters. You will be able to find underneath the window where you see our video, the profile links for the speakers that are participating in the Lightning Talks today. So just use those links within the EventMobi platform to locate the presenters that you want to connect with. You can click on their name and then choose send a message or schedule a meeting to connect with them. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my video and get us lined up for the very first talk. Thanks again. This will be Robert Campion talking on his work to use mapping to showcase AIS management planning.
Hi everyone, my name is Robert Campion, and today I'm going to be presenting to you how I used ArcGIS Online to showcase AIS management planning for Vilas County's Land and Water Conservation Department. This is a pre-recorded presentation, so I've included my email in this slide here. Please contact me if you have any questions about it. So the goal of this map was to take all of the information that you see in bullet points here on the right and turn it into something that you could actually easily visualize and use to help with conservation efforts and for AIS planning in the future. So you can imagine that we had all of this information on hand in spreadsheets and files that weren't super helpful to us because it was all disjointed and not connected. And by turning it into a map that you can access all of the information that's stored in these different bullet points just by knowing where you want to go and clicking on it and seeing what is there and what's around it, we've created a really versatile tool that lets us really easily and quickly get the information that we need to help us better do our job within the county. And so the final result for this map is actually a now public access published map through ArcGIS Online that can be found on the Vilas County website, which shows users multiple layers of information that they can toggle on and off as they need them, that anyone can use. And we're hoping going forward, now that it's up on the website and published, that we can really get the word out about it and really get people interested in using the map for its multiple functions and hopefully instill a better sense of the importance of AIS prevention and management efforts in the county. And so just as an example of what you might see when you open up the map, I've taken North Twin Lake here as an example to show you what the iconography on the map kind of looks like as you explore. You can see that the legend gives you all of the information that you need to kind of very quickly and readily understand what it is you're looking at, while selecting icons and clicking around the map will actually pull up dialog boxes that give you more detailed information on what you're looking at. This isn't a complete legend. Obviously, there's more on the map than shown. And this isn't all of the information that you would get when clicking on the map. It's just condensed for this presentation. But one of the coolest features of the map is that in 5 out of 14 towns across the county, we have photos of the boat launches attached to the boat launch icons. So by pulling up that information, you can actually see what the boat launch looks like before you actually go and visit it, which we're hoping is a really popular feature with the map that draws a lot of attention and views to it. And so in summary, this map is a really convenient, easy way to showcase a lot of information related to AIS in a single space for a wide variety of audiences. That allows you to interpret not just where AIS are, but who's doing what about them and where areas of AIS presence might need additional help or less help, etc. As well as having photos of boat landings, which we hope really attracts a lot of people to the map and gets them looking for the photos and learning more about the AIS while they're there, as well as all of the useful features that come with a map, like being able to search for lake names and being able to map out transportation to these lakes. And of course, the best part about this map is that through ArcGIS Online, every layer that we have can be easily edited through the spreadsheets that all of this information is being pulled from. You don't have to make any changes to the actual map. You don't have to redraw any shapes or polygons. Everything is being drawn from the spreadsheet. So it updates automatically. You just have to change a couple numbers. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have any questions about how to make this map or a map like this, please reach out to me and let me know. I'd be happy to help you with any information that I can provide. Thanks a lot.
Very cool. Neat to hear. Gosh, with big data, there's just so many opportunities to use it. It's really neat. So thanks to Robert Campion. Next up, we're going to hear from Gavin Dehnert. He's going to be speaking on how he's bridging laboratory and fieldwork in his effort to understand effects of 2,4-D on fish. Let me get your timer started here, Gavin, and then when this goes, take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm really excited today to talk a little bit about how we're bridging the gap between laboratory and field work to kind of better understand the effects of 2,4-D herbicide treatments on fish. Next, please. 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid, or 2,4-D, is an active ingredient in many common commercial herbicide formulations that are used to control and combat invasive species. Next, please. Next, in particular, 2,4-D is used to control and combat Eurasian water milfoil. And while it's well established how 2,4-D is very effective on combating Eurasian water milfoil, its impacts on non-target species like fish are not quite well understood. Next slide. And one of the ways that we normally go about looking at the effects of toxicity of a herbicide is by using standard, well understood laboratory experiments such as embryo toxicity tests or fish life cycle toxicity tests, etc. And we usually do these in a laboratory for a couple of reasons. One, we have a very highly controlled system. We can control the light, the temperature, everything down to a T. And this allows us to manipulate very small parameters to really help us understand very specific questions. And two, we're able to really understand some very fine endpoints, such as we can find very small differences in survival, per se. Next slide. And so these are a lot of the reasons that laboratory experiments are positive. And over the past 5 years, we found a lot of different research on the effects of 2,4-D on fish, especially in the laboratory. We found that multiple different fish species can be impacted by 2,4-D exposure. We found that certain life stages are more sensitive to 2,4-D exposure. And we also found, maybe most importantly, that environmentally relevant concentrations can show some lethal impacts. Next slide. And this always leaves us, though, with the same question over and over again, is how does this translate to the field? With the big question then being, do we expect the same results in the field as we do in the laboratory? Next slide. And this is a great question, as each lake is unique. And by unique, I mean that each lake can have different water parameters. They can have different pH, different acidity, basic levels, different water hardness, different nutrient loads, etc. And each one of these unique water parameters could potentially be impacting the toxicity of this 2,4-D herbicide treatment. Next slide. So the goal of my future work that we're going to be doing soon is to bridge the gap between the laboratory and the field work in order to better understand how laboratory work can compare to what would be done or seen in the field, to potentially be able to predict what you would see from lake to lake to lake. Next slide. And so then you might be wondering, well, how are we going to do this? Well, the first thing that we're going to do is, rather than doing these experiments in the lab, we're going to go to actual lakes that are undergoing the active 2,4-D treatments. And these are 2,4-D treatments that are actually permitted by the DNR. So we're going to go right to the lakes. And two, next slide, is we're going to use both a portable exposure system that we have built, and next slide, and an in situ exposure system that we have built. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these exposure systems that are usually done in a laboratory setting, and we're going to bring them right to the lake. We're either going to have them right on the side of the lake so we can use water that comes directly from the lake, or we're putting them right into the lake to really mimic the exact conditions that you would see in the field. Next slide. With the final goal of this whole project really to understand exactly if lab work is a good predictor for what would be happening in the field. And what this will also give us a better understanding is that if certain lakes can increase or decrease the toxicity of these herbicide treatments to non-target species, with the hope then that you could have a more direct application of lake to lake risk assessment herbicide treatments. Next slide. And with that, there's a whirlwind of the project that's going on. So I hope everybody stays tuned, and I hope to be back next year to present these results at the next meeting, hopefully in person. Thank you.
I hope so too, Gavin. Thank you very much. Wonderful. You managed to stay under the wire there. That's great. Hope all of the rest of you are that successful. Really excited to see that bridging of lab to field work. It's one of the big challenges to understand how what we learn in labs translates to the field. So we'll stay tuned to your work. It's exciting. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to our next presenter. We'll hear from Tim Campbell. He's going to be speaking on the influence of how we frame our messages to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And once I get this ready, Tim, you are free to start. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. And so I assume all of us that work and play in our lakes do some communicating about aquatic invasive species, and we all want to be effective or engaging in our messaging. And I think we have some insights on how we talk about invasive species could impact some of those thoughts and actions. So I think, next slide, please. But while there's a lot of opinions on these message frames and what might be most effective, we don't really know how these message frames impact thoughts and actions. We don't have a lot of data on this. And I think people maybe default to using metaphors that have a lot of meaning behind them, maybe a nativist or a militaristic metaphor, like fight the war on invaders, but that has some ethical issues to it. Are we actually at war with this other species, or is it fair to people that have actually been to war to talk about invasive species management in the same way? So there might be some ethical issues to that message frame, but maybe on the complete other end of the spectrum is using language that is just completely unbiased and has no other meanings, like using a kind of a stage AB27 invasion where you have to use some sort of chart to figure out what the impacts are and maybe what the population levels are. So that maybe doesn't mean anything unless if you have that chart. Another common message frame is the hitchhiker message frame, like stop aquatic hitchhikers, that invasive species are these organisms that just kind of hitch a ride and are kind of this byproduct of our actions. Next. So because we didn't have much data on how these message frames impact people's actions, we decided to try to test it, and we tested it using Facebook ads. So there's a message testing feature that allows you to do this pretty easily. We worked with an artist to try to kind of capture some commonly used message frames that we see in invasive species communication. So within these ads, we used a drawing. All the drawings are pretty similar in terms of color and kind of dominant elements. And then we used some text to help reinforce these message frames. And then we did some pilot testing to help make sure that people kind of understood this. So this is our militaristic metaphor, just trying to really get at the idea of the war on invasive species. Next. This is our nativist metaphor, which really tries to get at that kind of fear and unwelcomeness of unknown, others. Next. This is our kind of more positive, protective message frame, the kind of you can do it, that we're just trying to build people up. And yes, that is a drawing of Chris Hammerla, if you know Chris. Next. This is our hitchhiking metaphor. We purposely did not use any stop aquatic hitchhiker imagery because we didn't want to test the brand. We wanted to test the metaphor. Next. And then finally, as kind of a control, we used a science or just fact-based message frame, which is just a prop with a bunch of zebra mussels on it. Next. So in the world's worst speed talk slide of tables and numbers, what we found through testing this was that the message frame we used impacted the audience actions. So people, if we ask people what they want to do with their communication, they say they want to be engaging or they want people to take actions. Well, there's different kinds of engagement and different actions that people can take. So, in terms of clicking through to learn more about invasive species, the militaristic and science message frames did best. But if we're looking at kind of Facebook reactions like likes or hearts or smiley faces, literally anything but the science one did well. If we want people to share that message, the hitchhiker and protective ones did well. But in terms of like page lights and generating conversations, the nativist and militaristic ones did the best there. And we also tested this for women as well and saw similar but slightly different results. But in the interest of time, we're not going there right now. So next. So with this, I think we have some evidence to show that how we talk about invasive species impacts the actions people take, which to our knowledge, that simple point did not really exist in the literature in a way we wanted it to feel confident in saying that. And so I think a key point that we're hoping to make with this paper is that we can use frames that don't have some of the ethical baggage and can still get some of the same end results. For example, the nativist frame alone was not the most effective at anything. So be intentional about the use of your message frame. Think about it, before you communicate. And this paper will be published hopefully in the next month or two. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. It's nice to remember words matter. Appreciate your work. Okay. And from there, we're going to move on and hear from Jayne Jenks, who's going to tell us about monitoring Asian clams.
All right, thank you very much. May as well go to the next slide already. So we started out Asian clam monitoring 2 summers ago. I saw the draft for how to do it at the Water Action Volunteers website. And so I called up Alana and said, hey, do you want to test this? She said, sure. So we tested this 2 summers ago. I should back up a little bit and say Asian clam is an invasive species from Asia. The picture there, the way to tell it apart from the native species is that it's got ridges, and you can kind of see them in the photo, but I'm going to run my finger on the ridges here. And hopefully you could hear that. But so it's very obviously ridged, and that is the way to tell it apart, because there's not always a size difference, even though the big ones are bigger than your native fingernail clams. The little ones are the same size, and they can be hard to tell apart. So it was first found in the Mississippi River in 1981. But it was found in the Mukwonago River in Waukesha County in 2008. And we were the first place other than the Mississippi River in Wisconsin to have it. And since then it has spread to the Fox River, Eagle Spring Lake, Lower Phantom Lake, Little Muskego Lake, and Lac La Belle. And I know I found it in Oconomowoc River, and I just haven't vouchered it and turned it in yet. So it's spreading rapidly. Next, please. So we set out to do this survey. And the first thing you do is take a few width measurements and come up with your average width. And from that, you determine how many transects you're going to do. Well, we were doing the Fox River when we tested this, which is a fairly large river. So we needed 8 transects if you look at that table down there on the bottom. So we determined we needed 8 transects. We had, as you can see in the photo there, we had about a half dozen people that were doing this. And at this time, it was all staff people that were working on this. Next, please. And so once you have your transects determined, how many transects you're going to do, you set up your line and you check the substrate the whole way across. So we spread out and we just worked our way across, and you're digging in the substrate. So you need to have some sorts of tools. I've seen people use strainers before. Strainers are hard to use, I think. Nets work, I think, the best. They've got a nice long handle too for when we got to the deeper areas, they came in handy. But you also need some bins and things to pour what you're finding into. So you do your transect there, and you can see in our trial, we found our greatest density was in coarse substrate. When we got into the silty, mucky areas, there really were not very many clams. So they were very definite in the rocky areas. Next, please. And so there are sheets, data sheets that are available at the Water Action Volunteers website. And that is the data sheet there on the right-hand side of that page. And you just keep track of your density. So, you know, we had to keep track. There were maybe 6 of us across that side. Maybe not everybody found Asian clams in their section that they did. So we had to put all of our sections together to come up with a basic density. And that's pretty much what you're tracking there on that web or on the data sheet, is tracking your densities and the substrate on that sheet. Next, please. So we finished up there, and what did we learn? We found out that large rivers need larger teams. It took us hours to do it, which was interesting because in the protocol that had been printed, it was estimated that it would take maybe an hour to do it. Well, we spent an entire afternoon out there doing it. So we recommended to Alana, we said, you know, you need to change this and say it can take longer. But our takeaway from that was that you can involve more people. So last summer, what we did was we offered this as one of our citizen science opportunities and let the public come join us. And even with COVID, we assigned family units a transect. So we had 8 transects, and we could take 8 different family units and give them each a transect to run. And needless to say, this made it a very fast way to go. And the only other thing you need to remember to do is voucher your fines. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayne. Gosh, congratulations. That's a really neat effort. I encourage anybody who thinks that that sounds as fun as I do, love fieldwork, reach out to Jayne, and maybe she has some additional tips. Really innovative approach to adapt to COVID with that family pod volunteer organization thing. That's really neat. Thanks for your time. And now I'd like to welcome Matt Wallrath. He's going to be giving us an update on the invasive red hailstone plant that can be found in the driftless area of Wisconsin.
Thanks, Allison. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Fantastic. My name is Matt Wallrath. I serve as the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at the Upper Sugar River Watershed Association out of Mount Horeb. And I'm also a AIS County and Travel Coordinator for the Driftless. 9 counties now, going to 7 counties next year, or I guess in about a month. I'd like to thank my partners here, Jason Granberg of the Natural Heritage Conservation Department of Natural Resources, who did the maps, and Leo Roth, who did all of the actual spraying and trialing as part of the Wren's Weed Science Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now, why red hailstone, you might ask, versus golden creeper versus a name that I shall not say, as that has been deemed inaccurate and offensive. And I'm not going to try the Latin name because I'm not very good at that. So we call it red hailstone at this moment because that's what EdMaps calls it. The DNR has been calling it golden creeper. There's a lot of golden creepers. So we're making a move to call it red hailstone and this kind of moment. That's why it's a hot topic to some extent. Also, it's an emerging threat. You can see it on the right there. Next slide, please. So what I did as part of a team, we met at Woodman on the lower Wisconsin River. And then I was, as a river man, assigned to go up and see what I could find. So we found a landing by driving up the highways and landed at this really cool bridge, this big open muddy riverbank where we could put in. And there's this huge infestation. You can see these little heart-shaped things crawling, a little bit of yellow in there. It's just covering, it's blanketing all of the willows and other box elders and things along the side of this riparian corridor. So this experiment was all about getting down the river and seeing where it occurred and where it did not occur. And you can see that through the various color coordination with red, yellow, and blue colors. And luckily that last half mile before it gets to the Wisconsin River looked like it was empty. And so our hope is that it hasn't quite made it down there yet. Other teams have scouted. It has not been reported. We did find it farther down the river in 2020 than we did in 2018. And thanks to Eddie Lehman for collecting this data and some great photos as well. Next slide. So we're trying to control this stuff, right? We want action. So the Wren's lab has been out there. This is an experimental site. You can see corn in the background. They sprayed with a backpack sprayer 2 different times, a summertime and a fall time. You can see the dates there, a bit about the details. And Garland was effective. And so this was happening in Grant County, where that little arrow is. You can see, so far we have verified populations in Polk, Grant, and Waukesha counties, according to the DNR. Next slide. So here's the brass tacks. If you really care about this stuff, want to do it yourself, breaking it down volume by volume. I had to ask what this meant myself. And also things that have aquatic ability. So the takeaway is that Garland worked well. It has this good control for the first year, but these tubers do keep on coming back. So it's a repeat control thing where spraying is very effective, but because it's persistent under the ground, you can't really get everything, and they do kind of have some ability to hold off. Next slide, please. Finally, it's underreported. This is something I looked on eBay while the other people were talking. It's for sale right now. It's not currently even regulated, but it's showing a real big bully effect on streams and rivers. A bit about ID. It has this tuber that you can see. That's why we call it that. The red hailstone has not yet been discovered, the actual fruit. So I'm calling it red hailstone. We've never seen a red hailstone. If we see a red hailstone or a female flower, that is big news. Right now, this stuff is cloning itself and moving down in high water events. So in that 1-inch flower, if you were to see, it's dioecious, means it has 2 different types of a male and a female plant. And so if you were to see a 3-parted style, that means it might be a female flower. We really want to know about that. You can see the whole region around us where it's been reported in EdMaps. And again, if you're going to report it in EdMaps, make sure you find red hailstone because that's what it's in there as. If you look on for other stuff, you will not find it. So a bit more about ID now that I've got your attention about this species. And it, again, I can't speak about regulation, but it may be regulated in the future, quite likely, in fact. It is alternate with these heart-shaped leaves. It looks a lot like our native grape, but it's not lobed. It's very heart-shaped. The tendrils come off on the opposite side of those leaves, and so it's a climber, and it does have these cool underground tubers, which is how it spreads around. So I'm just encouraging everyone out in Wisconsin and the region to keep your eye open for these brilliant yellow flowers, for these heart-shaped climbing vines, and dig for tubers. If you find that, you know that you might have this, and let us know, let the DNR know as soon as you can. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, let's do snapshot day and get a beat on this the location of this new species. Thanks for your work. Thanks, folks, in advance for participating. Yeah, monitoring is so important for these new invaders. Okay, well, thanks, Matt. Now let's move on to hear from Bob Thome. He's going to be presenting on concentrated animal feeding operations in water-rich counties.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
And here we go. Thanks.
Okay, so what is the CAFO? A CAFO is a concentrated animal feeding operation. It's an agricultural enterprise where animals are kept and raised in confined situations on a small land area. Feed and water are brought to the animals rather than having the animals out grazing or seeking feed in pastures or fields or rangeland. Next slide, please. The size of the CAFOs are measured by animal units. And essentially what one animal unit is, you have 1,000 animal units is a large CAFO, 500 is a popular number. The question is, what does that have to do with us? We're concerned with water, with the runoff of the manure, well contamination, and obviously the smell. Next slide. An animal unit is defined as 1,000 pounds live weight per head of beef cattle. So in Oneida County, we're allowed to have one animal per acre. A lot of these places have 1,000 head of cattle or 2,500 pigs or 125,000 broiler chickens in a very, very small area of, say, less than 10 acres or less than 40 acres for sure. Next slide, please. Oneida County has about 1,500 lakes. 9.9% of its area is surface water. We have 3 major watersheds, the Wisconsin River, Flambeau, and the Wolf. And 73% of all Oneida County residential value is waterfront properties. And tourism generates another $229 million of revenue. So it's important to protect our waters up north. Vilas County is very much similar, and so are the 4 counties around there. Next slide, please. There's 3 ways outside of the state regulation. You could locally, through the town or the county, there's 3 basic ways to regulate CAFOs. You can have a manure storage ordinance countywide. You could have a countywide or town comprehensive CAFO ordinance through licensing or permitting. Or you can do it through districting. So you can define which zoning district a CAFO was an allowed or permitted use. So you could say that forestry district at CAFO is not a permitted use, but in commercial ag it would be. Next slide, please. So this to me is stunning. If I'm a new CAFO operator, I would look at where is there the least amount of regulation. So if you look at the 6 counties in the north central area of Wisconsin, you can see there is no manure storage ordinance in there at all. Go to the next slide, please.
I think that's all I had.
There's one more with a picture of the state.
Let me see here. Ah, you're right.
That one right there. There you go. This is a picture of the state and where there are CAFO ordinances, whether they're licensed or by zoning. If you look at the light color, they're done by county. The real bright yellow ones are done by town. And if you, all the little dots on there are CAFO operations that are being regulated right now. If you also note that a lot of where the concentration is, it's located near rivers, big rivers in the state. So in Oneida County right now, what we're doing is we have a moratorium on CAFOs. We're working towards both a CAFO, a comprehensive CAFO ordinance, as well as a manure storage ordinance. And hopefully we will be able to have one or both of those in place by the time the moratorium ends, which is at the end of August this year, 2021. And if you just count there's about 23, there's 23 out of 72 counties that are doing something as far as regulating locally regulating the CAFO operations. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Really nice to know about that as we think forward, especially in light of some of the work that's being done now on lake protection. Thank you for sharing that information. Okay. And at this time, I'm going to restart my timer. And we'll welcome to the stage Nate Conroy. Nate is going to talk about some of the work regarding an effort to combine STEM education and water conservation. Give me a second to get to your. I can. Let me give me a second to get to your talk here. Oh, there it is. All right. Are you seeing your slides?
I am, yeah. Well, hey everybody. My partner in this presentation, Melissa Ruether from UW Stevens Point, sent me a private message just a moment ago saying get pumped. So I'll bring it, Melissa. But in all seriousness, it's really wonderful to be on a call that's making me really proud to be a water nerd with all of you. So really impressed by everybody's presentations. We are water nerds on the side of trying to get more young people excited to be STEM heroes in the water industry. So using science and technology and math as a career. And the way we come about that, this started in Milwaukee, by the way, is next slide. We utilize utility data as a means to engage students with information that is both personal and relevant and connected to water, connected to natural resources, something that they can act upon. And at the same time, helps build some of these initial skills related to data analysis and efficacy around action, being something that they can do. This is something that we've done with students around the state, but there's always been this challenge. And so this presentation is a little bit about our effort to try to address an equity challenge here. And that challenge is that we normally have students engage with the meters at their home. So that's something that is usually accessible to students in a single family home. But as you might imagine, especially in Wisconsin, things like apartment buildings, duplexes, those students may not have access to a water meter especially, but also perhaps even the electricity or natural gas meters might be in an area that's off limit to them. Next slide. So one effort that we've been piloting this spring is this idea of, can we focus students in on hot water utilizing sub-metering technology, and not an expensive sub-meter per se, but what other devices can we give students so that they can track real data and take action related to conservation. And so one strategy that we're piloting is actually providing the teachers that we work with a set of these digital shower heads that kind of have a readout of the usage, and students can track that data. We're really interested in hot water as something that obviously uses both water and energy, and that way we can try to help these students, even if they're in a multifamily situation, to to help save money for their families. Next slide. As we've rolled out these pilots, we're doing one in New York with a large school there, and one in Texas, among other places. There's been some challenges, and so one is that just cost-wise, these shower heads, we can only give a few to each teacher. Obviously, it's also one of those things we've learned from doing kind of in-depth interviews that, you know, not every family, especially in a multifamily situation, feels entirely comfortable removing a shower head or something that they have in their unit. There's fear of breaking something or sort of getting in trouble, that kind of a thing. And so, it's interesting. Some of the feedback has led us to sort of expand our pilot around also providing schools with advanced monitoring solutions, like a water meter monitor that the utility doesn't have to get involved with, but that the school itself can just strap onto their water meter. There's a similar technology on the energy side. We're leaning towards this solution. We're going to be testing this more, also just because this solution can be something that a teacher could utilize, with their class year after year after year, whereas those, shower heads would obviously be something kind of a one-time use type deal. So we're really excited to be investigating this, and just think it's really important to make sure that we're thinking about how to equitably include all young people in these conversations related to water and sustainability. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Melissa and Nate. You're training the next generation of water nerds, and we really appreciate that.
I hope so.
Yeah, this is really neat work. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce Deana Knuteson. She's going to be speaking on the Wisconsin Healthy Grown Program and agricultural sustainability.
Yeah, hello. Deana Knuteson here. And let me just say, I've really enjoyed this format. So kudos to the organizers on this. It's been great to have these short but very informative talks. And I'm going to talk to you today about an agricultural program that's a little bit different, but really some of the ecological restoration work we're doing with that, which is part of the water talk. So go ahead, next slide, please. Healthy Grown is an overview of something that's done in the state of Wisconsin with the vegetable producers, where they're looking at implementing research-based protocols for production and integrated pest management, which is how they grow their crop. Look at how they can efficiently manage inputs. And what I'm going to talk about a lot today is how to enhance the ecological conservation efforts on those farms. And standards have been developed for these productions of for potatoes, carrots, and onions. And the interesting thing with the ecosystem is that the growers are able to certify their whole farming operations because they're implementing landscape level restoration on their non-ag privately owned lands. So on their adjacent lands, whether it's forest or prairies or wetlands or some areas that have stream areas in there. So that's been a really exciting portion of this. And then growers are able to promote their efforts in agricultural sustainability, continual improvement, advances, which is good for public recognition and PR, but also helps put growers in the position for a sustainable marketplace, whether that just be preferential buying or different markets that people want. So next slide, please. Overall, Healthy Grown is done on a series of principles that we kind of go on, is that it's grower driven, that growers want to do this, that it's volunteer, that they want to be at the stage and kind of be at that cutting edge of what sustainability is. I'm out of the University of Wisconsin. We work with a large research team of extension and research-based faculty who help develop the protocols, the options, and the work with the growers. There's sustainability that they go through, including all the economic, environmental, and social sustainability aspects. The standards, as I mentioned, there's the best management practice adoption, and that includes from seed all the way through the sales and through the table. So the kind of the seed through the fork, as we say, of what the practices that we would consider high bar practices that we want growers to do. There's pesticide risk assessment, and it's having growers look at what is both the human and environmental risk for a pesticide and how you might use that pesticide more effectively to limit the effects on fish, bird, wildlife, of course, human health risk, and in resistance management programs, and basically look at the lower risk options out there. IPM planning, look at how you're going to plan your integrated pest management program, how you're going to manage your disease, weeds, insects in a really effective way using all strategies beyond just pesticides, but cultural strategies, biological, all these. And then finally, the ecological restoration component, which, like I said, I'll focus on a little bit later. But every year, the growers do get independently certified, where they sit down with an auditor, and hopefully that certification for those fields and for their program gives some return to growers. So next slide, please. Now, when growers actually develop an ecological plan, they start by sitting down with a certified ecologist who develops a long-term 20-year plan for growers so they can look at, if we're looking at your whole farming system, what are 2 or 3 priority areas that you would really want to focus on to do some ecological restoration, whether it's, like I said, wetlands or prairie establishment or whatever you might do. We want to make sure that those are long-term. They're not just going to be used for a few years and then sold off, or used for a few years and then go on to a different type of management. So they want it to be long-term. And then each year they get something like this from an ecologist. Well, they'll have a priority site, priority thing, priority management of what they're doing there, and then a timetable and an action of what the growers have to do on their farm each year. And it's interesting because this is a learning process. As growers are good at farming, they're not actually as good at knowing what to do in the ecology end. So it's a good interaction and an educational program for growers to learn and to help manage their farms as well as contiguous communities around their farm if there is adjacent habitats. Next slide, please. Some of the practices that they do, they'll do burning, pollinator plantings, prairie restorations. They've done a lot of biological surveys, invasive species controlled, water budgets, wetlands, stream restorations, and as I said, conservation with adjacent areas. And we are working at doing a lot of stewardship training as well. That's very helpful. And throughout this program, in the last 10 years, there's been over 1,000 acres that are actively managed under something within the program. So that's really exciting. Final slide, please. So it's interesting, when we talk about healthy grown, we always say, what is healthy grown? Is it really just growing the potatoes, the onions, or your product, or is it growing the whole landscape and ecosystem? And in our case, we feel like it's everything. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at any time. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Deana. Nutrient enrichment is such a pervasive problem in Wisconsin. It's really good to hear you doing something about it. Thanks for your work. Okay. And that brings us to the last speaker of the session. I'd like to welcome Bob Livingston. He's going to tell us about pre-vegetated blankets that could be useful for shoreline restoration and erosion control.
Thank you,
Go
Allison.
ahead, Bob. Sure. Thanks.
Pre-vegetated blanket is a process, a patented process we utilize and can grow prairie, forbs, woodlands, wet mesic inside in a controlled environment and ship it and deliver it on site with a 70 to 90% vegetated state. And the plants are not rolled or bent or crushed. They'll continue to grow and rapidly into soil. These crops can grow and be engineered to the soil that's specific to the site, location, sun, etc., and the slopes. And then we can install it, and it can pretty much have just taken out about 2.5 years of waiting time with regular seed and sometimes the loss of having plug plants expensively put in with a lot of mulch around when it washes away and may lose things. So about 4 to 6 weeks for most crops. I think woodland crops take about 8 weeks or so. We can customize, grow just about anything. Seeds can be shipped here as pure. We do not use a cover crop. We grow in a hydroponic in controlled manner. We use natural sunlight and salvage rainwater off our facility and pump it back in as irrigation. We can transport this. We design it to be logistically mobile in container trucks, flatbeds, etc. But it rapidly establishes because the roots aren't cut. The fine hairs of the roots are still intact. We can transfer this and lay it down like a standard erosion control blanket, but pre-growing, no weeds. And because we covered existing soil up with a living crop, the dormant weed seeds that are in exposed soil that's at a job site or a location that you're trying to restore stay dormant. We can root in 1 week and we can handle 2-inch rain event the same day it's installed. Next, please. So these are some of the things we can grow in and the different locations we can use. In the foreground pictures, you'll see the vegetation at about 4 weeks right here. At the bottom one, the top picture on the left is about 2.5 to 3. And then the right-hand picture is probably just about that 6-week period. Next slide, please. So how the process works. We have a standardized erosion control blanket that we have knitted to a depth that we need to hold a grow type mix on. It's a light sphagnum moss type mix with some nutrients, and it's set into a hydroponic state. We can vegetate it and control it with airflow, water, and natural sunlight. And then we can lift this crop, transport it, and the pre-vegetated standardized erosion control blanket can be lifted out and transferred on a site, and the trays come back as returnable deposit and go back to the growing facility and do it again. We can use a lot of the biodiversity. We're not limited to what you want to plant, but we do make suggestions for things that have some tough sites, especially on hot, dry soils, etc. There is soil prep, like any establishment of retention basin or rain garden. There should be soil prep, and usually engineers, architects, landscape designers have applied for that to be implemented in a project, and then the blanket can be installed and stapled down. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. So on these three pictures is a project in southeastern Wisconsin and Wallrath County. We're located in western Kenosha County. This product on the far left side, when we delivered it, was 1 week post installation. The plant material had already been vegetated for about 6 weeks. We're already about 18 inches in height. In 3 months, the same season we put it in, it's at 90 days, we're at about 3.5 feet. And the picture to the far right is after we came in the following spring after it got cut, and it regrew again. We've handled a very heavy stormwater ditch going to Lake Geneva in the city of little town of Deana. So there's a tool in arsenal. We can try to replace some of those difficult sites and even gradual sites. We can pre-grow what you want specifically need for that site and ship it and install it and have 100%, literally almost 100% vegetation. That means every square inch has what you want. You don't need the necessities of mulch and plugs every 18 inches or quartz every 18 inches on center, and reduce the amount of maintenance you need. We do this organically. We're not using any man-made synthetic fertilizers. We do this with organic type fertilizers. Most of it's just rainwater. And then next slide, please. This is 1 year post, a 2 year and a 3 year post. So we've done some burns on this. Pre-vegetated blanket can be burned off after the second season. The basal roots is a secret. In one of my previous slides, the basal roots are the secret because the basal roots have grown through the pre-vegetated erosion control blanket, and we have enough duff on top. We don't burn the coconut fiber blanket, and we do this without using, we use a bio blanket that doesn't have any plastics in it, so it's bird friendly and safe to use, so it's biodegradable. So this is the process. It's now patented for some years now. We have a utility patents on this process, and now we're going to manufacture trays. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Bob. More restoration per unit time. Sounds good. Sign me up. Neat. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks everybody actually for presenting today for our lightning talk session. I'm gonna unshare. Nope, actually here, let me just talk quickly here about my deep and abiding appreciation to the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership for helping organize this and all sessions that we've been experiencing as part of Wisconsin Water Week. Thanks to our 9 lightning speakers, fantastic amount of information in a short period of time. It was an incredible session. I hope everybody learned a lot and enjoyed the diversity of talks. Once again, to remind the viewers, if you have any follow-up questions for any of our presenters, please reach out to them. You can find their contacts below the video screen and use the tools to either send them a message or schedule a meeting to connect. So with that, I'd also like to give a shout out to our lead sustaining and supporting sponsors. We couldn't host this without you. Thank you for your support of Wisconsin Water Week, sincerely. This about wraps it up for Tuesday's content on water bodies. Thanks for spending this time with us. We have a little bit of time before the closing session starts at 4:30. That'll be back on the main stage. So I encourage you to take a look at the exhibitor and sponsor booths with the next 10 minutes, maybe participate in some Water Week challenges or even vote in the photo contest. And again, please do join us back on the main stage at 4:30 for closing thoughts on today's material. Thank you, and it's been wonderful spending time with you all.